I will hand over to David for his talk on preliminary notes for Mambila multimodal research, database ethics, and online environments. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation. In lots of ways, it's very timely. And I've enjoyed preparing the talk because it sent me back to early data, and I keep finding new stuff basically in old data, and this is a case in point. But there are issues. Now, how do I advance? I think I have to click there. So let me start with a preliminary, if I can say the words. So, Mikonga ma bonua ba neten dine kanahan ma bineten homnaka bi akili mende fa bonji mene julu. Mikonga juru kuku samga ama bonji mende tui de bonji mene julu. So, homnaka mabo veneten BTK. So, for the very few people who can't speak much Mambila, that's a health warning that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be showing some things which are, well, taboo, sensitive, and that is potentially dangerous. This starts from where is the center I've put on the slide? The center of the world, as far as I'm concerned, is a little village in Cameroon called Sommier, and I'll show you where that is in the map. And one of the issues that raises, if you start from there, is that one is prone to saying things everyone knows. And of course, most of the people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis in the village, that is true of. And I was when I was planning these sorts of things, I was envisaging being able to say it while sitting in All Souls College, well, one day. And I'm conscious when preparing this, I've been conscious that issues to do with ritual, and particularly ritual speech, the gestures that accompany ritual speech, don't feature highly in the agendas of Red Hen or IMCC. And actually, to be honest, they haven't featured very prominently in my own agendas. And that's, again, why I'm quite grateful to the invitation to make me start thinking about this. And the one conclusion of it is I've got lots of data, and it would be great to find someone who wanted to work on it. So if you have students looking for projects or postdocs or whatever, please send them my way. Then I've got some more preliminaries, which are mainly provocations that I suppose for linguistics that come out of being a researcher working on a, well, not a very small language, but smallish. So worth remembering that most languages are not, and most languages in the history of language, however many hundreds of thousands of years one wants to go back, most languages have never been written. And it's always worth remembering that when generalizing about language. And also, as I will come on to say more about, I'm very wary of presumptive monolingualism. That's the exception, not the rule. And again, if you start from a situation, a presumption of multilingualism, that changes quite a lot in how one designs, well, both linguistic theory contentiously and perhaps documentation and databases. And the sorts of languages that I am talking about are what are called low resource languages. So yeah, there is no money. Sampling bias, this is a fun one. So there's about 7,000 languages in the world. And of course, as soon as you start saying things like that, you have to put in huge numbers of caveats, because how do you count languages? There's huge debates about what's a language, what's a dialect, and I think the only thing worse than counting languages is not counting languages. It's conceptually a big problem, and again, I will come on to some suggestions that have been made that begin to address some of those problems. But however many languages there are, there's quite a few, and into the thousands. And I think it is safe to say no one's going to suggest there's less than 5,000. So just as part of the background to this, I had a look on the ProQuest International Dissertations list, and in 2010, by a very happy coincidence, there were just about 7,000 PhDs awarded in linguistics. And half of those are on just 3 languages. Cameroon, where I work, large number of languages, most multilingual in Africa, only had 1 linguistics thesis in 2010, and the most populous, the country with the most languages in the world, Papua New Guinea, in 2010 had precisely 0. So there is a definite bias in linguistics to work on standard languages, which is, I would suggest, a big problem actually. And the weight of speaker numbers absolutely does not imply linguistic interest, and almost certainly I would say the reverse, but I mean, that's perhaps just too polemical. Yeah, there's a big issue about all the languages which get left out. And there's a different sort of sampling bias in multimodal communication studies, because to a large extent, they seem to be working on broadcast TV material. I mean, it's, in a sense, it's easy, it's out there, but it's predominantly monolingual and it's biased to large speaker numbers. So on that basis, I'd say it is not a good basis to generalize. Having said those things, I'm quite conscious that I'm going to be talking mainly about monolingual Mambila stuff, although there's quite a lot of code switching in it. So I'd also like to point out that I can't see sign languages being featuring in, well, it's certainly in Red Hen. And if you want to kind of look for multimodal communication, it seems to me that would be a very obvious place to start. And I'd point out that as well as American Sign Language, British Sign Languages, there are quite a lot of other ones. And so, well, Theresia Hoffer, I think she still lives in Oxford, did postdocs in Oxford, and now teaches at Bristol, working on Tibetan Sign Language, which is a very interesting example because that was a local creation. And there are other examples such as Kenyan Sign Language, where there are scholars working on it. So there is a body of material available on this sort of multimodal communication. And I mean, Kenyan Sign Language is interesting because of its relationships to both English and Swahili. So my theoretical starting point is language ecology. It is an approach that fits pervasive multilingualism, and it seems to me that as normative assumptions go, coping with most languages in the world presume multilingualism as the norm, and then start explaining why in a few idiosyncratic pockets like North America you get entrenched monolingualism rather than the reverse. And I want to put in a plug for Anne Storch's work with colleagues working in Northeast Nigeria, where they have taken multilingualism as a way of addressing linguistic evolution. So taking interesting kind of complex ethnic, multilingual, multi-ethnic, multilingual situation and addressing some big questions in language evolution. And this is where I kind of also want to put in a plug for Jeff Good and colleagues who are moving from linguistic documentation, often driven by language endangerment work, to address these issues I've already alluded to about the difference between language and dialect, and therefore how many languages are there. And they want to talk about, so Jeff Good and et al, they distinguish glossonyms, doculects, and resulting in languoids. I never know how happy I am about these sorts of neologisms, but it does sort of work, I think, and it certainly raises some interesting questions. And so glossonym, the name of elect, but often, quite often, the name for a language really isn't the name for a language, it's the name of the ethnic group that speak the language, English being a case in point, and of course Juba, of course, because everybody knows that Juba means the talk of the Mambila. We can talk about this in the discussion if you like. And final bit of theory, apart from plugging a long article I wrote with students and colleagues last year. Ludwig, Mulhauser and Pagel have a nice model of language ecology and language contact. You probably won't be able to read the diagram, but it's there in their edited book. And of course, this is what's not in there is any sort of multimodality, and it would be interesting to return to their model and see how it works in a multimodal environment. I'm particularly interested in things like gestures which bridge different languages, different lects, and how multimodality, how gestures will work in code switching environments, I suppose, is one of the questions that seem really interesting to me working in a multilingual environment. So that's my preamble out of the way, let me say a bit more about Mambila then. So Mambila is a Mambiloid language. It's the largest of a group of 5 or 6 languages which are non-Bantu Bantoid. That's the old terminology. It's in the area, we're just to the north of, just a couple of 100 kilometers north of where Bantu languages are believed to have originated. So at one level, everyone in the area you can regard as being the Bantu who stayed at home. But even that language is controversial. The point is, these are Niger-Congo languages, but they don't have noun classes. And maybe Proto-Mambila did once have them anyway. We're not talking about language history there. So Mambila is spoken mainly actually in Nigeria. I work with a relatively small population on the Cameroon side of the border. There are 2 ISO codes. The dialects spoken in Nigeria are not really mutually comprehensible with the Nigerian dialects, which is why there are 2 codes. My colleague Bruce Connell has done a lot of dialect work, and it's not as straightforward as Nigeria versus Cameroon. It's basically, it's an east-west divide. And again, I'm happy to talk more about that in the discussion. Yeah, I want to talk about gestures in the end. So yes, I've already said Juba, the speech, the talk of the Ba, and Ba is the ethnonym for the Nigerian Mambila in MZK, the Nigerian Mambila dialect. It's Jubo, no, Junor, sorry, N open O or Nor. Yeah, a map. So there's Cameroon, and it's very easy to see where Somi is. It's just under the second right angle of the international border, and the right angle bend halfway up is created by the Mambila Plateau in Nigeria, which is the highest part of Nigeria. And I'm at the bottom of the escarpment. Somi is at the bottom of the escarpment. What else do I need to say about that? Not a lot. Oh yeah, just since I've mentioned it, if you want to know where Bantu languages originated, you can see on Konsamba on that map. If you go ever so slightly west from there, you get to the Mananguba Mountains, which is reckoned to be the origin of Bantu languages about 3,000–4,000 years ago. I mean, and again, the whole issue of the Bantu expansion is highly controversial. Right. So, background, and this is where it starts. I have to start thinking about what I can safely say. So I'm going to be talking quite a lot about schwa, which means it's a key thing in Mambila traditional religion. It names male masquerade, which women cannot see, although having said that, there's a qualification that there's at least a hint that in the 1950s on the Nigerian side of the border, old women were allowed to see it. This is quite a well-documented phenomenon of, there's a lot of rituals in quite a lot of different groups where basically postmenopausal women become honorary men and so can participate in things that younger women cannot. There is also a female masquerade, and its Mambila is relatively unusual in this, which men cannot see. And there's no suggestion there that old men can see this. And when I say men and women can't see the corresponding masquerade, and this is why I have to put in a health warning. What Mambila informants would say is that the sight of the other masquerade can create madness and infertility. So be careful. Although I'm not actually going to show you, with one contentious exception, I'm not going to show you anything dangerous. Schwa also is the name of a ritual oath-taking, which women can hear but cannot see, and only men can address. And my doctorate actually was mainly about the oratory around the Schwa oath. So again, I've been kind of quite pleased going back to some of my early recordings, and that was one of the things I was doing during lockdown as well. Schwa is also invoked, during a blessing called Dhamma, and I've missed the tone marks out of that slide. It's a low tone. And everyone can see Dhamma, everyone can hear it. Not only men can make the invocation. The video clip I'm going to show you is of a man doing it, but I've got video of women doing it too. Oh, I keep clicking in the wrong place. So I've got a few examples just to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about and how gesture accompanies Mambila oratory. And it's basically, I've arranged it in a sequence from less problematic to more problematic. Okay, so let's start with a completely unproblematic bit of oratory, which is from about 2000, and this is at a wedding feast. And so when a wedding takes place, basically there are reciprocal visits. Everybody visits everybody else, and there's a lot of singing and dancing. And this is, neither of the two men who are standing are actually part of the families who are getting married, if you see what I mean. The man in brown, and I've cut out the man in the white coat just to shorten the clip. The man in brown is a senior man from the hamlet at which this, where this took place. And part of the significance is that the incoming wife came from a neighboring village, a neighboring ethnic group. And part of the stuff he's talking about is that she and her family are not of the same ethnic group. But it's a very short clip. They're all short clips. So basically what he's saying is, what I'd forgotten is that the senior in-law couldn't attend because they're ill. And he said that everybody wants this marriage, and basically when he kind of raised his hands like that at the end, they want the drinking and dancing to go well, and they don't want any trouble, is the short version. And one of the things he did when he was going like that, he was saying, Tele bo mi bo mwina. So father, the mother, and the child. Yeah. Okay, so now, this is actually recorded the day before that previous one. This is the chief of the village addressing the village before the Adama ritual, which we will come on to. And this is all in the run up to a huge communal festival. And later on, he was saying stuff like paint your houses and brew beer, but don't get drunk and have fights. So it's quite hectoring, I suppose. And I'll just do a very short clip of this. So pay attention. So he was saying, you come to meetings, this is on the inside of the chief's palace. Normally the meetings are on the outside. This is on the inside because of the ritual, really, which is why it's so monolingual. And he's saying, you come and then you listen, and then you forget, you go outside and you forget everything I've said, basically. Right. And yeah, you get a sense of the gestures that accompany it. And all right, the next clip is it was recorded about 18 months after the previous clip, and it's after the man you have just seen, the chief you have just seen, had very sadly died really quite young. And in the aftermath of his death, there were all sorts of issues about how he was buried and how the chief's family should behave. Because I've talked about Mambila religion, and what I haven't mentioned is that most people in the village are also, as well as by and large, doing stuff to do with traditional religion. Most people are Muslim or Christian, 2/3 Christian, 1/3 Muslim. The issue about the chief was that he was Muslim, and when he died, the Muslims in the village basically insisted that he had an Orthodox Islamic burial, which is fine, except there are issues about, there are special burial rituals for the chief which didn't take place, or didn't take place in the sequence in which they properly should have done. So so this video clip comes from 6 months after the death, and it was a meeting in the chief's palace for the family, and I've included it because I wanted to have some examples of female oratory. And so the woman you are going to see speaking is a senior, she's in effect a cousin of the chief, but she has a titled role. There are 5 titles for women. The most senior of those is called the Queen, which is a bit confusing as a translation, because it's not necessarily a sister of the chief. I can talk endlessly about that, but I won't. So let me just play the clip. So she's talking about the chief's head. Okay, so I'll just stop it there. I mean, what I like particularly of what just happened was the way that she moved from using her left hand to her right hand, and she kind of made the gesture for she basically pointed to her mouth to emphasize the importance of her speech. Yeah, I think I will move on. Okay, so now this is the Dhamma ritual, and the blessing. So there's no problem in women seeing this, but if you want to watch it properly, you should raise your right forefinger, and you really should be facing east, as they are all doing. And I'll let the whole thing play. It's basically an invocation of good things to come and bad things to go, or that, yeah, just to prime you, that one of the refrains is, if bad things come, what will they see? And everyone says what they always, I mean, they don't say what, so what will they see? And then everybody says ne shwa. So the shwa, which is, remember, the oath, it's either the oath or the masquerade. So let me let this play. Let me go back. Now, the really significant thing for me, which I'd not noticed before preparing this, was that right at the end, he turns from facing the east to facing the west, and he flicks off his fingers. And that's exactly the same gesture that men, and I mean men, make after they have dug a grave and buried a body. Only men do that. And it's part of, in grave digging, they say it's to rid the pollution of the death. In this context, I think it's basically about, it's a desacralizing, so it fits the kind of classic Van Gennep rites of passage sort of model. He's stopping being a intermediary invoking the blessing and going back to normality. Here we've got an instance of the making the Schwa oath. I've blanked out the most problematic thing for women to see. And as you can see, there's an awful lot of women who are present, so they listen. And so I don't think there's any problem playing you this clip. It's a very short clip anyway. And again, what the audience do is they raise their right finger, and as the refrain is, oh, should something bad come, should I, oh, it's not a personal oath, so should I do anything bad, mi so chenanyu, and mi so chenanyu, mi fa so 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 so, and so you dip your finger down to the ground and then raise it again, and what you're basically saying, if I'm lying, may I die, and then to the ground, and if I'm not lying, may my head be hard, may it be strong, and so you're basically gesturing towards the east, although well, he's basically pointing at what's behind the blue square. Let me just give you a taste of that. Okay, and if depending on the sound quality, you might be able to hear the cheeping of a chicken, or I suppose it's a chick because it's a very young bird. That is part of that's part of an element of the ritual. Right, let me go to the next slide. And this is just a still. This is the women in the background, and you can see that they are covering their heads in some cases. They are, in some cases, putting their hand against their eyes. But then right in the middle, there's a woman who is bowing her head and no more than that. I mean, she's attending to a baby. So what do I want to say about this? Yeah, look, they've averted their gazes, but it's hard. It's very easy to peek, let me put it like that. And as evidence that women have more knowledge of what's going on behind the blue square in the previous clip than men might like to admit. In some of the preliminary rites to the female masquerade, they're basically, before the stuff that is completely taboo, so I had to leave, there was stuff which was deemed as being shameful but not taboo, and basically the women are ridiculing men and everything they stand for. And one of the elements of that ridicule is that they did a parody of the Schwa Oath, which was remarkably accurate. So from somewhere, they have got some knowledge which at some level, lots of men would say they shouldn't have. I will say no more than that. So here we come to my big dilemma. There's a photograph from 1938 taken by an early missionary, which has been published. So it is sort of in the public domain. The caption says it's a rehearsal, so not the real thing. And actually, let me just look at who the participants are. Well, there don't seem to be any Mambila women present, so I'm inclined to show it to you, but with the caution that if any of the women present are concerned about their sanity, their fertility, they should look away now. And does anybody object? I'm not seeing anyone objecting. Okay, let me show it to you. And basically, any Mambila man who has been initiated into the male masquerade sees that photograph and knows exactly what's going on. Let me move on quickly for fear. And basically that is the dance that accompanies the male masquerade. The reason I feel it's sort of okay to show it is that there are none of the masquerades visible in the photograph. It is just the dance that accompanies it. So the stuff that is particularly taboo is not in that photograph, but I know plenty of Mambila who would say that I shouldn't have shown you that. And so it does lead very nicely to the big ethical dilemmas in all this. How can we design systems that address multiple divergent opinions? And of course, there are plenty of Mambila who are strict practitioners of one of the world religion, one or other of the world religions, who would say, you know, all this is bad. Mambila traditional religion is bad. To be a good Muslim, you shouldn't do any of this. To be a good Christian, you shouldn't do any of this. And, you know, but there are plenty of, most Mambila go to the mosque, go to the church, and then go down the road and do the traditional stuff too. So I am very conscious that there is not a consensus among Mambila, and I don't want to suggest that there should be. And so how should we do it? Well, there are models that are helpful, it seems to me. And the work of Heidi Geismar is a case in point. And also lots of the work that has been done in Australia is potentially helpful, and also helpful because of how rapidly things have changed. And for those of you who don't know, among lots of Australian Aborigine groups, the traditional model was that after someone died, you absolutely should not see a photograph of them, but more than that, you shouldn't pronounce their name. In some groups, you shouldn't pronounce words that have syllables that are contained in their name. And some linguists have seen this as a motor for linguistic change. And this has been a huge problem. Leaving all that aside, this has made it very difficult for people in museums such as the Pitt Rivers Museum to return imagery to the source communities, because old photographs, what you know is they're all dead. And so, and even kind of more photographs taken in the 60s, most of the people are dead, but not all. And then it gets really complicated. How can you share bits of photographs? And people have spent huge amounts of time and energy developing databases which allow photographs to be switched on or off, or individual faces to be switched on or off. And the things that have become clear is that how people behave in private is different from how people behave in public. And so it is one thing to quietly, privately, with the grandchildren or an individual grandchild of someone long dead, might want to be able to see a photograph of a grandparent in a way that they absolutely wouldn't want to do it in public. So the actual context in which this is taking place is really significant. Also, a lot of these attitudes have changed since mobile phones and the cameras in them have arrived. And so now everybody has access to photographs. It seems opinions are changing. So that's one model. Another coming out of Shirley Ardner's work in basically working on the political breaking of sex taboos, is to view research uses as a sort of privileged space, so that on her account, it is okay to share some of these problematic images, problematic ideas, words, whatever, in the privileged space of a seminar, because within that space we are doing research, we are sort of standing outside the normal taboos, the normal conventions of everyday life. Now, whether that works on for databases online, different question, and that's why I really can't decide whether I think this talk should go onto YouTube or not. And the model for this, of course, is ethical privilege. It's an ethical privilege based on the idea of legal privilege, that the communications between lawyer and client can't be disclosed. Research space on this account is a liminal space that perhaps you can see but not speak, or you can analyze but not share, which is fine, but as long as you don't want to get involved in open science, which of course we probably do. And so moving to an end, Bruce Connell, the linguist with whom I collaborate a lot, have written an article on sociolinguistics, which we've talked about and Storch a lot, and multilingualism. I've published about sharing, but with very, very long embargoes. And so there are some references there. And I'll leave you with a QR code. And I am assured that you can take a photograph of this and it will take you to my ORCID page, which I think is quite cool. But I'll shut up now and we can have a discussion.